Hey everyone. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Although we know it's going to come to head at some stage of the game, so they're just kind of stepping out in front a little bit, right? Doing a little preemptive damage control. This in regards to CBC on the 180, CBC radio. So you have to be listening to the radio. You won't probably see much of it reported on like the actual television news outlets in CBC across the country. But on the CBC radio, you will get a little bit of this stuff. That's one thing I've always recognized. The radio part of the CBC broadcasting still has some pretty decent reporting. And what this is in reference to is stop subsidizing seniors. Off the top of the head, that would sound like, oh, what you hate old people? Oh man, you're cruel. What you want to cause hardships for senior citizens? What are you, cruel? You're vicious. You're vile. In reality, wait a minute. In Canada, and I mean, if you're Canadian, you must, no matter what age you are, look at, if you're young, look at your parents, your grandparents, or great grandparents. Or if you're old, look at your successive generations and ask yourself, who are the ones that seem to be doing pretty well? Seem to be getting along with not much problem whatsoever going through life and actually living pretty well, living high and mighty, right? Yep, it's the baby boomer cohort for the most part. The ones that now are, they're all entering into the senior citizen years of their life. Oh, don't mention that to them. You get them even more pissed off that they already are. They're scared to death of getting old, but hey, if something happens to us all, deal with that reality. Stop trying to, live in your youth. Maybe pass the torch. That was the golden rule or the golden standard, right? You don't pretend that you're going to own and dominate the world for all of it from the time you're born till the time you die. Yeah, there's the passing of the torch. Boomers haven't learned that particular lesson yet. But let's listen to what this gentleman has to say. I believe it's Max Fawcett. It says, for his entire life, Max Fawcett has been watching the well-being of baby boomers be privileged over other Canadians. But let's just listen to what this article touches down on, and we'll cover the topics or the points. We'll go point by point. Let's listen to what they got to say, though.
A new report from the Institute for Research on Public Policy lays out troubling news for Canada's seniors. It says that unless municipalities make changes, aging baby boomers will end up isolated in their car-dependent suburban homes or be forced to move away to more livable but less familiar communities. It's just the latest call for policy changes to benefit seniors, but Max Fawcett says it needs to stop. Not only should government stop focusing on new senior-friendly policies, they should claw back the subsidies to seniors that already exist. Max Fawcett is a freelance writer based in Vancouver.
Freelance writer. Well, that explains a lot, right?
Hello, Jim. How are you?
I am just fine. So what's wrong with making planning decisions to take into account the needs of all of those aging baby boomers?
Well, it sort of reflects a broader trend in society, which is that we seem to make all of our policy decisions on the basis of what's best for the baby boomers. They've always been the center of attention, certainly in my life as a 37-year-old, and further back than that, and policies tend to benefit them to the disadvantage of other Canadians. And we're starting to see that more and more as the boomers age, as they the number of Canadians who are senior citizens approaches 1 in 4, which is a record high, and it's starting to pull money out of social programs and out of other areas where it might be more effectively deployed. I mean, there's this myth that still exists that seniors suffer poverty more than the rest of us on average. And the fact of the matter is that hasn't been true in almost 2 decades. But we still have all these policies on the books, all these tax credits, all these programs that give handouts and freebies to seniors who don't really need them. That money could be going to students, it could be going to single parents, it could be going to immigrants, it could be going to a whole bunch of other groups who actually need the money, who need the help.
What do you have against baby boomers? This sounds personal, Max.
If those who know me would say I have a lot against baby boomers, but it's nothing personal. I don't have anything against individual boomers. My parents are both boomers, and I'll leave the psychologists to read into that what they may. But I just think that it's a generation that has hogged the limelight and taken up too much of the attention for too long. And frankly, they had it easy. When they went into the job market, jobs were plentiful. Unions were still real things that weren't an endangered species. When they started earning, the peak earnings in their career, the stock market was booming, the bond market was booming. They bought houses when they were cheap, and in most major cities in Canada, they turned into winning lottery tickets. People who bought houses at 180,000 can now sell them at 4 million. So they've had a real great run of luck, and I think maybe it's time to kind of tilt the tables away from them and back towards the rest of us. I think young people, they take a lot of heat, and they get made fun of a lot, but for being soft and being entitled.
Anyways, I'm going to continue on because I love what this guy's got to say. But even when he's talking down on now, I mean, think about it. Even myself as an adult, as a parent of two adult sons, of course, at some stage of the game, yes, don't focus your attention on me. Even myself, I'm going to stop focusing my attention on myself and my own goals at some stage of the game and worry about letting the next generation to take over and have their turn at the table, right? The boomers, they got that snip of power because their parents, the greatest generation, after World War II and, North America especially, we weren't devastated by the wars. I mean, socially and because we lost a lot of people but the country wasn't attacked, right? None of our countries were attacked. So there wasn't really as much rebuilding as far as infrastructure goes. It was just rebuilding personal relationships and families, although that never really happened totally. But when you think about how many people got themselves so much into this whole ideology, this entrenched mentality of using government as a means to subsidize each other. I mean, like I said, it was probably something that was fairly profound and fairly acceptable back then, right? Because everyone back then even knew, savings were high, right? Debt levels were much lower. So, yeah, he's suggesting, people were like, well, we're going to funnel more money into the people that have had to suffer from those things, or the children that have had parents. So the parents, because of everything that had happened in their time frame, right, during their preemptive years, they're like, I'm giving my kids, and it would have been the guilt, right? It would have been the guilt from the greatest generation. But they were like, I'm giving my kids everything that I couldn't have. I don't want them to have to suffer from any of this devastation or destruction. I don't want them to have nothing to do with wars, and I'm going to give them economic and social abilities that I never had, which they did. But think about what always happens is society and citizens is basically, you can expand that out to in a family setting or a parental and children setting, right? So what would happen if you gave your kids, because you had guilt, and you went through a lot of hardships yourself, so you gave your kids everything to try to protect them. Well, what happens? It sounds good in theory, right? But the consequence of giving free range to your children without teaching them personal responsibility, instead of using guilt, if you had stuck to your principles, things might have been different. But because they gave their boomer generation, their offspring, so much advantage in society, well, they got to take that and they ran with it. And I mean, part of me is like, good for you. I'm very happy for them. Actually, most of the time, I'm very happy for all the beautiful things that got to happen to them. Where I find the problem, where most of us are always finding the problem, is why are you so fucking selfish? Why don't you want to do that for your offspring? I mean, sure, you didn't have to go through wars, right? So I know your psychology, your mentality might not be in the same place that your parents were, but don't you still fundamentally want better for your kids than what you even had? I know I do. I mean, I want to benefit and I want to have a great life, but I'm hoping that my kids have an even greater life than I do. That's the passing of the torch. I got to enjoy my time. Especially when you're talking in your most productive and formative years, if you had a 30 or 40 year run, like I say, pass that off. Economic, social, every other ability that you've gained or accomplished, don't you want to share that? Don't you want to give your successive generations that same opportunity? Obviously not, because if you look at now what they're willing to do now, predominantly the boomer generation, they want to keep the gravy train going only for them. And they're the ones that are making the Gen X, like people like myself, which are basically the forgotten generation, right? It's like, do we even exist? Well, I guess we do, because we're kind of boisterous, but because we're so self-reliant and independent, because they were off doing their thing. But the millennials, yeah, you're not doing as well. And it looks like Gen Z, the younger generation than millennials, they might be the ones that will be more aligned with Gen X, right? So it might be X and Z. They might have to come together at some stage of the game, right? I don't know. But it is a serious problem that we all have to recognize and realize that, yes, I mean, we're all about giving elders opportunities and take care of them with safety nets. But if they're the ones that are making out like bandits in society, well, we're all, just barely scraping to get along. Yeah, there's nothing fair about that. Let's continue on, see what else this gentleman's got to say.
And all the rest of it, but young people today really have a tougher go than their parents did. It's demonstrably true. You lay out the numbers about what it costs to go to school, what it costs to buy a house, what they make on an average job graduating from university. Everything, with the most part, except for maybe access to cell phones, is harder. And so I think we should be focusing on making it easier for young people, and not easier for those who've always had it pretty easy.
And nobody forced them to move out to the suburbs and have to drive everywhere.
No, exactly. I mean, the cynic in me says it's not necessarily a bad thing to have elderly baby boomers isolated in a community far away from the rest of us. But, the point that you make is a good one. They chose to live there. They made a rational decision. They were big proponents of the car economy, highways and roads and all sorts of things like that being built by public taxpayer dollars. And, it's a bit disingenuous for them now to say, hey, you need to build new things to cater to us because this no longer works for the way we live. I think we should be building our cities and building our society for those, who have the biggest stake in the future. I know that sounds maybe a little cold-hearted. I don't have anything particularly against senior citizens. They're lovely people, but I think as a society, when we start making decisions on the basis of what's best for senior citizens rather than what's best for future generations, we start to get into a dangerous place.
Yes, he is absolutely correct on many levels on that. And even if you think about what other societies are doing, right? Because we're always understanding that societies and wars have been something that's dominated human culture for all of our history. So yeah, so if in places like Canada or the US, if you're giving the young kids or your successive generations less opportunities, less influence, less income, less wealth, then that puts them in a perilous and precarious position to even stand up and oppose and the psychology, right, of other people in other countries, right? So if people in other countries have different cultures and different philosophies and different principles, if you keep making your offspring weak and dependent, well, you're putting them in not just a precarious situation in your own personal life, in your own social and economic situations, but even from external influences or external invasions of different social or economic development, you're putting your children at a very, 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 very bad disadvantage is what you're doing. So yes, and that's the thing too. If you're elderly, I'm sorry, and I love my elderly, like whether you're my parents or my grand, but you're going to be dying. Some of you are going to be dying in a fairly short time frame in comparison to your successor generations. Why would you want to leave them in the worst, most vulnerable positions, right? You're not going to be here. Like this gentleman's saying, it makes no fucking sense if you care about your offspring to leave them in such vulnerable positions all the time. You got to think outside of just your narrow little scope of just you and your kids. Think about the social, political, and economic aspect in the big picture, in the philosophical aspects, right? Think about what you're doing to them, what kind of precarious situation you're placing them in. And it's not just because of you. They're going to have to deal with everyone else. They still have to function in the world that you're leaving to them, which is pretty poor and pretty unsustainable at this stage.
And with the number of boomers that are out there and their propensity for voting, the real danger is that politicians are going to listen to them.
So,
right, like this gentleman was saying, that's another thing too, because baby boomers make up a large one of. Well, I think they're still the largest cohort of voters in Canada. So yeah, you'll still be able to use politics to dominate your successive generations and cater to you. But once again, why would you want to do that to your successive offspring? Why do you want to put them at such a fucking nasty disadvantage to not just other people in our provinces or localities or the country of Canada, but even in comparison to people or countries all over the world? Why would you want to do that to your offspring? Not only is that stepping away from the golden rule, that's stepping on it. It's disgusting is what it is.
this new report that's just come out on suburbs and seniors, how should policymakers respond to it?
I would hope that they would respond to it by, looking at the future, looking at the direction that city making is going, and trying to build cities that accommodate and empower the largest number of people. I think, we have fewer dollars than we did 20, 30 years ago when these suburbs were really being built out most aggressively. As a government, as a public, to put towards infrastructure. We need to really maximize the bang for our buck. We don't do that by building suburbs that you need to drive 45 minutes to get to. We do that by building density, by reinvesting in the downtown core, investing in transit, things where you really get multiples on your investment, rather than continuing to build this car-oriented form simply because that's the way it's always been and because boomers are comfortable with it.
Now, over and above this report, you recently wrote that in next week's federal budget, the government should cut subsidies to seniors. What sorts of things are you talking about there?
Well, I should be clear, I've taken a fair bit of heat for this because people think that I'm suggesting we should cut back on CPP or old age security. Not at all. Those are untouchable programs as far as I'm concerned. But there are some things in the tax code that are a little bit conspicuous. They're holdovers from a time, in the 70s and 80s when seniors really did suffer from disproportionately high levels of poverty. So there's a tax credit in there that gives you a pretty sizable tax break just for being over a certain age. That seems unreasonable to me. We should be, certainly means testing that and making sure that if you're a senior who has a $3 million house or has saved well for retirement, you don't get to take that tax credit. That money can go to someone who needs it more.
So, when it comes to government, once again, it's just about levels of stealing and wealth redistribution. So I'm not going to agree with this gentleman in any way, shape, or form. I think everybody should be here's your paycheck, just like prior to 1917 Canada. Your paycheck, you get to keep 100% on that. If you want to pay into a particular service that you use, right, because that's another thing. Not everyone uses all the services, right, in Canada. People talk about, but you have all these services. Not everyone uses them, right? And the few times that they do, if you count and if you do the mathematics up, I've done it myself, I could have paid for it multiple times over for the few times I've used like the healthcare service or stuff. Give me the money, give me the ability to save up my money that the government's stealing from me. I could have done it and still had a lot more money left over. So no. But like he's suggesting, is just stop. Exactly. Just because you reach a certain age, you could be 55 years old and get seniors discount and maybe be a multimillionaire. How fucked is that? You get to save money, which is subsidized, because if you can save money, somebody else is going to take up that slack predominantly, right? We know it's always to pass the buck, but it might be a poor millennial that's heavily indebted to the tune of 60, 70,000 just try to get an education, and they'll end up in a low minimum wage job. But you're forcing them to subsidize seniors that are millionaires. That doesn't make sense, and I agree with this gentleman wholeheartedly when it comes to that aspect of it. Now, there's only a few minutes left this video, or this audio, CBC radio. I will post this whole thing in the description of the video below, and you can continue on to listen to it. It's only about another 3.5 minutes or so. I'm already at 20 minutes in my own video, so I don't want to go through the whole thing. But yeah, you're getting the gist of the topic, the gist of the subject, right? Is yes, we've got to stop. It's not nothing that anyone, I put it this way, the most important person, I don't know if I've expressed that much on my past videos. I don't like to bring the woman into things. She's 91 years old, and She doesn't have to be brought into these things. You know, I let her stay aside. But my grandmother on my mother's side is probably my. Well, I don't like to say that because it causes a little friction in my own family with everyone else, but she's one of my favorite people on the planet. Right? Even my mother, which is now fast approaching, well, she would be considered senior year. She'd be past senior years if you were a government worker, but because she worked in the private sector, 65 is considered when you reach retirement. So she's not quite there yet, but no one would ever suggest, I would never suggest that we're going to take away their ability to be able to retire in peace and comfort, or at least relative comfort, right? Without having to fear for the future. None of us, no Canadians that I know of, I've never heard anyone say that. And if they did, oh, I'd point them out, and you know I damn well would, because I'd be like, what the fuck kind of a piece of shit are you? Right? So, of course, and just like this gentleman, of course, no younger Canadians want to throw their elders under the bus, right? But when they're doing really, really, if they're doing like 10 times better than you are, should we really be subsidize them? I think not. It's Canadian Libertarian. I love liberty.